wound did not end at Malachor. It should have. The world had been broken so completely that even memory recoiled from touching it. Continents had folded into themselves. Fleets had been dragged down screaming into a gravity well that did not merely crush steel and bone, but tore meaning from the living force. The dead did not rest there. The living did not live there. Malachor V remained, if remaining could be called existence, as a blackened verdict against every general, every Jedi, every soldier, every obedient hand that had followed the command to fire the mass shadow generator. From that verdict, Darth Nihilus rose. He had not risen like a man rescued from slaughter. He had not risen like a survivor. Survival implied something had endured. What left Malachor was less a person than the shape hunger chose, when hunger learned to wear robes, to walk on 2 feet, to lift a hand, to command the terrified and the damned. Beneath the mask there was no face worth naming. Beneath the robes there was no body that mattered. His own flesh clung to him as an afterthought, a reluctant prison around an appetite too vast for meat. The Ravager carried him away from the dead world, though no captain truly steered it. The warship drifted through hyperspace like a corpse remembering how to move. Its broken hull had been stitched together by wrath, salvaged plating, and the will of a lord whose silence was more terrible than command. Men and women served aboard it with the pallor of prisoners sealed inside a tomb. They whispered that their master did not speak because language had abandoned him. Others said language still existed in him, but only as a weapon, a sound that could pull the soul out through the ears. On the bridge, they knelt when he entered. He did not look at them. He looked beyond them. Beyond the shattered viewport, beyond the bleeding lanes of hyperspace, beyond the places the Republic still called safe, there was a pulse. Not a light, not a beacon, a pressure, a buried empire breathing in the dark. Most beings felt the galaxy through the living force. Birth, fear, longing, rage, love, disease, hope, and all the little sparks of being that filled the silence between stars. Nihilus felt absence. He sensed where life was thickest because around such places the void sharpened. A populated world was not a jewel to him but a sealed banquet hall. A fleet was not steel and engines, but a cluster of throats. A temple was not stone and discipline but a vault of warm, trembling nourishment. In the first hunger after Malachor, his senses turned toward the Republic. There were Jedi still. Fewer than before, scattered and afraid, but bright enough to burn. There were worlds wounded by war, defenseless in their exhaustion. Telos struggling to heal. Onderon boiling beneath crowns and old oaths. Dantooine hushed around ruins where students once believed wisdom could protect them. There were senators on Coruscant arguing under artificial sunlight, while their citizens dreamed of ration lines, missing sons, and the next fleet that might fall from the sky. They would have fed him. Any of them would have fed him. The Republic lay spread before him like a wounded stag on snow. Yet, in the chamber of his hunger, something older turned. Darth Treya had once told him that the galaxy was full of lies, and that the greatest lie was the shape of power. The Republic believed power sat in law. The Jedi believed power sat in restraint. The Sith believed power sat in domination. But beneath them all, Treya had whispered, there were things that ruled without flags, without councils, without temples. Need, fear, dependence, hunger. She had taught him not with tenderness, for tenderness had curdled in her long ago, but with the patience of a woman sharpening a knife while speaking of philosophy. She had shown him that a wound in the Force did not merely devour. It listened. It answered emptiness. It was called by other absences. And now, somewhere beyond the known routes, beyond the charts stolen from Mandalorian vaults, beyond the old hyperspace whispers Revan had brought back like poison in his blood, there was an emptiness that did not flee from Nihilus. It called back. The Ravager changed course. No officer dared ask why. Men who asked questions aboard that ship were sometimes found days later still standing at their stations, eyes open, mouths full of ash, their bodies dead but obedient until they collapsed. The navigators obeyed the gestures of the veiled acolytes who interpreted their lord's will by the tilt of his mask, the tension in the air, the sudden rupture of a man's veins when a coordinate displeased him. Star by star, they abandoned the hunting paths that led toward the Republic. Star by star, they sailed into regions where even the oldest smugglers marked maps with warnings and lies. Behind them, the Republic survived because no one knew it had been spared. On Telos, restoration crews woke under pale morning and did not understand that the shadow which might have eaten their sky had passed them by. On Dantooine, farmers drove posts into earth above buried lightsabers and did not know that death had looked elsewhere. On Onderon, nobles sharpened their grievances, captains counted troops, and jungle beasts roared beneath moons without feeling the mask turned toward them. In hidden places, the last Jedi remained afraid of a predator that did not come. Fear, however, does not become harmless simply because it chooses another road. It becomes someone else's apocalypse. The Sith Empire had waited in the dark so long that patience had become its religion. It did not call itself hidden, not in its own halls. Hidden was what lesser people said of things they lacked the strength to find. To the pureblood houses of Dromund Kaas, to the warlords of Ziost, to the scholar priests of Nathema's surviving archives, the Empire was not a remnant, but a sea. The Republic had swollen across the galaxy in ignorance, proud of its wounds and parades, while the true heirs of darkness cultivated armies beneath storm clouds. They had rebuilt after ancient defeats. They had carved temples from black stone and raised citadels beneath lightning. They had bred discipline into their children and hate into their ceremonies. Their emperor had promised them that one day the stars would open, the old shame would be avenged, and Coruscant itself would bow beneath banners of red and black. They believed time belonged to them. They believed hunger was a tool they alone understood. In the throne citadel on Dromund Kaas, beneath towers that pierced permanent thunder, the Sith Emperor sat in meditation and felt a new silence enter his empire. It was faint at first, so faint that any lesser mind would have mistaken it for distance. Then the silence grew teeth. He opened his eyes. Across the chamber, braziers guttered. The Emperor's attendants, robed in layers of ceremonial black, fell to their knees though he had not commanded it. Their faces drained of color. Some pressed their hands against their throats. Others began to weep without sound. For centuries he had known the shape of death better than any living being. He had consumed a world once, not as Nihilus consumed in blind need, but with ritual, design, calculation, and triumph. He had drunk Nathema dry and made absence kneel before him. He had lengthened his life beyond the arrogance of kings. He had hidden his empire behind walls of secrecy and force, training it for a war that would break the Republic and vindicate every century of exile. Now, from the outer dark, something came that did not scheme, did not negotiate, did not desire a throne. Something came that wanted only to feed. The Emperor smiled. It was the first mistake he made. Xion learned of the departure from men too afraid to lie well. The assassins came to him beneath the stone throat of Malachor, where corridors twisted like the ribs of some buried god. They moved silently, as they had been trained, but fear made them clumsy in the Force. Their thoughts scraped against one another. Ravager. Unknown regions. Master gone. Republic untouched. Hunger turned away. Darth Sion stood before the cracked wall of an old training vault and listened while they described what no one understood. He wore pain like other lords wore armor. His body had been killed many times and refused each death out of spite. Flesh split across him in raw seams. Bones that should have rested in graves held together by hatred alone. Every breath was a victory over mercy. Every step declared war on peace. When he turned, the assassins flinched to spite themselves. "Nihilus," one of them said, and the name died in the chamber. Xion crossed the distance in a single motion and lifted the speaker by the throat. The assassin did not resist. Resistance would have implied hope. "He was not sent," Sion said. His voice was stone dragged across a tomb lid. The assassin's lips trembled. "No, Lord. He was not summoned. No, Lord. He was not commanded." No, Lord. Sion tightened his grip until bone began to complain. The others remained kneeling, eyes lowered, disciplined enough not to beg for a life that was not theirs. Treya's school had never been a unity. It had been a wound with 3 edges. Sion endured through pain. Nihilus devoured through emptiness. Treya judged through betrayal. Together, they had hunted the remnants of the Jedi. But alliance among such creatures was a temporary arrangement between disasters. Sion hated Nihilus, though hatred was too living a word for what passed between them. He hated that Nihilus did not suffer as he suffered. He hated that the masked lord's power required no endurance, no courage, no glorious refusal to die. Nihilus merely consumed. He was an absence worshipped by fools. Yet even hatred had habits, and Sion had expected the hunger to fall upon the Republic. He had expected worlds to dim, Jedi to scatter, survivors to come crawling out of hiding, desperate enough to be found. Then he would take them. He would break their hope with his hands. He would show them that pain was stronger than serenity, that surrender was the only honest prayer. Instead, the Ravager had vanished beyond the old Mandalorian roots, toward the Empire of Ghosts. Sion released the assassin. The man fell hard, gasping. Behind Sion, the holomap flickered. Its blue-white stars trembled in the stale air. One path burned red, reconstructed from stolen sensor echoes and fragments of hyperspace wake. It cut away from known space and into regions marked by dead probes, lost scouts, and Sith legends that even Sith hesitated to repeat aloud. "The Hidden Empire," Sion said. None of the assassins answered. To the Jedi, Revan's war had been a tragedy of idealism corrupted. To the Republic, it had been treason by heroes who had returned as conquerors. To Sion, Revan's fall had always smelled of something deeper. Revan had discovered more than battlefields in the unknown regions. He had returned with strategy in his eyes and dread beneath his commands. Malak had carried ambition like a torch. Revan had carried knowledge like a wound. The Hidden Empire existed. Sion had never doubted it. The ancient Sith had not all died in Republic triumphs and Jedi histories. Some had fled beyond reach, nursing bloodlines and revenge. Treya had spoken of them only rarely, and always with that thin, cruel amusement she used when watching students step toward traps. Sion remembered one lesson. "There are Sith," she had said, "who believe themselves patient because they wait centuries to strike. But waiting is not wisdom. A beast may wait in a cave because it fears the sun." None. He had asked if they would one day face that beast. Treya had smiled without warmth. One day, the beasts may eat one another. Now Nihilus had gone to feast upon the cave. Sion turned from the map and climbed toward the Trias core, where Treya sat among echoes. He found her in the chamber of broken geometry, where the Force bent and whispered around pillars that seemed not to obey architecture. She stood with her back to him, veiled in brown and black, one hand resting on the lip of a stone basin filled with no water. She looked like an old woman. That had always been one of her better weapons. "You knew," Sion said. Treya did not turn. "I knew many things," she replied. "Precision, my apprentice. Rage is not an argument." "He has abandoned the hunt." "No, he has followed it to a richer field." Sion's cracked hands curled. Pain flared through him, obedient and familiar. "The Jedi remain. For now. We should be killing them. And if we kill them too quickly, what then?" Treya asked. "Will your pain become wisdom? Will his hunger become peace? Will the Force, wounded and blind, applaud your efficiency?" "Nadim, God." Sion stepped closer. The chamber darkened around him. "Do not speak to me of peace. I would not insult you with something so impossible." He wanted to strike her. He often wanted to strike her. He had struck her before, in rage and betrayal, and still her lessons clung to him like hooks under the skin. She had made him powerful. He had repaid her as Sith repaid all makers. Yet even cast down, she remained impossible to dismiss. Why send him there? Sion demanded. Now she turned. Her eyes, pale and pitiless, found the ruined places inside him with the ease of fingers finding old scars. I did not send him, she said. I merely allowed him to hear what was already calling. The Emperor, the thing wearing that title. Sion's anger shifted. You know him. I know of him. I know what Revon found. I know what hid behind Revon's war. I know that beyond the Republic's exhaustion waits an empire convinced it will inherit the galaxy. An empire of chains. An empire of ceremony. An empire that thinks itself the final shape of the dark side. Meh. Treya's mouth tightened, almost a smile. It would be educational for them to meet a darkness without politics. Sion stared at her. In that instant, he understood enough to hate her more. You would use Nihilus as a blade. I would use a storm as a storm, Treya said. The blade is too flattering. If he devours them, he grows stronger. Yes. If he fails, the hidden empire wakes. Yes. If both survive, the galaxy burns between them. Most likely. Sion moved so quickly the assassins outside the chamber would not have seen the motion had they dared watch. His hand closed around Treya's throat, lifting her slightly from the floor. She made no sound of fear. Her feet hung above stone. Her expression did not change. You risk everything. At last, something like disappointment crossed her face. My dear Sion, she said softly. Everything was already at risk. You merely preferred a smaller fire. Pain screamed through his body. He could break her. He could tear the old woman apart, scatter her lessons across Malachor, and rule the assassins by agony alone. Yet the truth held him more firmly than hatred. If Nihilus consumed the hidden Sith, the Jedi would lose the greater enemy they did not even know existed. If the Empire destroyed Nihilus, the Republic might face a conquest it was too weak to endure. If both wounded each other, then from the wreckage something else might be possible. A galaxy without masters. A galaxy without the Force's cruel games. Treya's eyes did not blink. Sion released her. She landed lightly, one hand rising to her bruised throat. You will follow him, she said. I take no orders from you. No, you take orders from your wound, and your wound cannot bear being excluded from another's suffering. Sion turned away. Behind him, Treya's voice followed like a blade sliding back into its sheath. Go then. Watch hunger meet empire. Learn whether pain can envy emptiness. Now. He left Malachor with assassins, broken frigates, and rage enough to light the old roots. Yet even as his ships rose from the poisoned gravity of the dead world, he sensed that Treya remained behind, listening to currents none of them could see. In the deep, Nihilus sailed on. In the deeper dark, the Sith Emperor prepared a welcome. And between them the galaxy held its breath without knowing why. Treya did not pray. Prayer was a bargain made by the powerless with something they believed might listen. She had been Jedi long enough to despise surrender disguised as humility, and Sith long enough to despise surrender disguised as devotion. The Force listened, yes. It listened as the sea listened to drowning men. It answered according to laws older than conscience. It gave gifts that became chains, warnings that became obsessions, visions that became traps. Those who called it ally had not noticed the leash. So Treya did not pray. She listened. The Treya's core breathed around her in fractures of possibility. Malachor had been broken so deeply that time did not pass there cleanly. Echoes remained. Every death from the war, every command shouted into static, every Jedi realizing too late what obedience had made of them. Every Mandalorian crushed beneath collapsing hulls. Every soldier crying for mothers whose names the Force had already forgotten. All of it lingered in the stone. Traya listened through those echoes for the sound of futures tearing open. She saw the Republic as a wounded creature wrapped in banners. She saw the Jedi scattered, guilty, diminished, yet still bound to the arrogance of guardianship. She saw Mitra Surik moving through the galaxy like a blade that believed itself a wound, drawing companions by the strange gravity of absence. The exile had done what Jedi feared most and Sith misunderstood completely. She had turned away from the Force and lived. That made her more dangerous than armies. She saw Sion chasing Nihilus because hatred could not bear irrelevance. She saw the hidden empire awakening one alarm at a time. And she saw Darth Nihilus approaching Dromund Kaas like winter given a mask. The temptation was to call it destiny. Traya hated that word almost as much as she hated mercy. Destiny was the lie cowards told after choosing not to resist. Nothing was destined. Everything was pushed, pulled, deceived, wounded, invited. She had invited this. She had left crumbs in Nihilus' path, fragments from Revan's charts, rumors planted in minds that would break near him, echoes of Nathema's void drawn from archives she had stolen before her exile. She had not commanded him. Command required a servant. Nihilus was no one's servant, not even Hunger's, for Hunger and Nihilus had ceased to be separate. But she had tilted the board. Now, the pieces moved. In another life, perhaps she might have pitied the Sith Empire. It was a machine built by the frightened descendants of survivors. Their pride was real, their cruelty disciplined, their power immense. But at the center of all their banners sat fear of extinction. The Republic had broken their ancestors. The Jedi had hunted their lords. The galaxy had continued without them. So they built a civilization around the promise that one day they would make history regret forgetting them. Children on Dromund Kaas learned the names of ancient defeats before they learned the names of stars. Noble heirs were taught to bow with knives hidden in their sleeves. Slaves looked upon black temples and understood that even gods could own property. Warriors trained beneath lightning while overseers carved obedience through pain. Scholars preserved forbidden rituals not because knowledge deserved reverence, but because any weapon might someday be useful. At the summit of that long grievance sat an emperor who had already committed the sin Nihilus embodied without thought. Nathema.e. The name flickered in Traya's mind, and even Malachor seemed to recoil. A world consumed by design. A population offered to immortality. A wound made deliberately, not by the panic of war, but by ritual patience. The Emperor had eaten life to become more than mortal. He had made silence into architecture. He had stared into the abyss and decided it should be a throne. Such beings were never satisfied. Immortality did not cure fear, it preserved it. Every year the Emperor lived was another year spent defending life from the humiliation of ending. He would conquer the Republic not merely for revenge, but because conquest filled time. He would break the Jedi because their existence accused him of incompleteness. He would rule the galaxy and still hunger. Traya wondered what expression he would wear when he realized something hungrier had come. She allowed herself one small smile. Then pain struck the Force. It was not on Dromund Kaas yet. Not yet. It came from the border world of Jaguada, an old Sith listening post hidden beneath ice and iron cloud. The Empire had placed watchers there generations earlier, bloodlines born and buried without seeing the conquest they were promised. They guarded sensor towers, slave mines, and a temple whose priests had spent their lives interpreting storms. The Ravager emerged above Jaguada without warning. The first Imperial response was disciplined. That was to their credit. Defense grids rose. Harrower-class cruisers moved from orbital shadow. Sith commanders in polished armor demanded identification. Temple adepts reached into the Force and found nothing they understood. Then Nihilus looked upon the world. Traya did not see it with eyes. She felt the shape of it through the echo before it reached Malachor. The population of Jaguada brightened in panic. Soldiers rushing to stations, slaves looking upward, priests lifting blades, officers screaming for shields, and then all that brightness bent toward a single point. Life became a tide. The tide became a scream. The scream became silence, not total silence. Nihilus was not neat. His hunger struck first at the force, at the bonds between living beings and the luminous current that sustained them. Sensitive minds died like candles in a storm. Sith adepts collapsed in their sanctums, eyes turned black by what they had tried to resist. Officers forgot orders while blood left their faces. Slaves fell beside masters. Mothers dropped children they no longer had the strength to hold. Engines failed because crews died at consoles. Shield stations went dark one after another. The warships lasted longer. Their crews were insulated by distance, Durasteel, and the frantic counter-rituals of Sith battle mages who had trained for Jedi attacks, Republic sabotage, Mandalorian raids, and slave revolts. But not this. Never this. Nihilus did not assault them like an enemy. He invited the living parts of them to become absence. One cruiser fired. Its turbolasers struck the Ravager across the bow, peeling away armor plates that had once belonged to 3 different fleets. The broken battleship shuddered, venting atmosphere and corpses. It should have died. It had died before. Instead, its wounds closed beneath crawling repair crews who no longer cared whether they breathed. The Ravager advanced. The second cruiser tried to ram. Nihilus raised one hand. Across empty space, the crew died at once. The cruiser continued forward under dead momentum, missing the Ravager by less than a kilometer, drifting past with every viewport dark. The third attempted hyperspace. Its navicomputer engaged. Its engines flared. Then the Sith Lord aboard it. A woman descended from a line older than the Republic, reached into the Force to shield her crew and touched the edge of Nihilus. Her scream traveled through every mind on her ship. The cruiser vanished into hyperspace unguided and never returned. Jaguada's temples cracked from the inside. In one chamber, a statue of an ancient Sith king split down the face. In another, a priest who had spent 40 years preaching domination died whispering that there was no self to dominate. Beneath the mines, slaves and overseers lay side by side in the equal democracy of being consumed. When the world finally quieted, it was not dead in the ordinary way. It was less. A place had been subtracted from the galaxy. On Malachor, Traya drew a slow breath. Around her, the Traya's core trembled with approval, disgust, or hunger. Perhaps all 3. So it begins, she said. Far away, on Draman Kos, alarms rang through halls that had not heard panic in centuries. The Sith Emperor stood before a gathering of his Dark Council, though to say he stood before them was to misunderstand the room. The councilors occupied thrones of black metal beneath banners of their power bases. They wore armor, silk, bone masks, jewels taken from conquered slave moons. They represented armies, intelligence networks, fleets, temples, assassins, academies, and treacheries refined across generations. Each believed, in some private chamber of the heart, that one day the Emperor might be replaced. That belief died quietly as he looked at them. Jaguada has fallen, said Darth Mar, whose armor turned even fear into ceremony. A lesser ruler might have demanded how. A frightened one might have denied it. The Emperor did neither. Not fallen, he said. Emptied. The council shifted. Republic weapon? Another asked. No. Jedi ritual? The Emperor's smile was faint. No Jedi has the courage for this. A murmur passed through the chamber. What comes, the Emperor said, is a wound given appetite, a remnant of Malachor, a lord without ambition, a hunger wearing the title of Sith. Then we destroy him, Mar said. Yes, the Emperor replied, but understand what you face. He does not seek territory. He does not fear death. He cannot be bribed, converted, humiliated, or ruled. He will not kneel for bloodline. He will not honor power. He will not care that you are Sith. Nain. That offended them more than the destruction of Jaguada. Good, the Emperor thought. Offense was easier to command than terror. He turned toward the great storm windows. Lightning climbed the sky like white roots. Summon the fleets. Seal the routes to Draman Kaz. Wake the old rituals beneath Kaz City. Send word to